Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zaquana Stevens. I am the Youth Workforce Development Coordinator at Families Together, New York State. Today's webinar is titled Strengthening Ties, Supporting Caregivers and Developing Their Natural Supports, hosted by Families Together and CTAC and presented by Crystal Rose and FPA, and the Family Workforce Development Coordinator at Families Together. Before we start, just a few housekeeping items. Everyone has been placed on mute to avoid any background noise. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, please reach out to the host via the chat feature, and Vanessa will be able to assist you. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, and we encourage you to chat in your questions throughout the webinar, and we will address as many as time allows at the end of the presentation. We would appreciate it if you could take a moment to fill out our brief feedback survey that will appear in the chat box at the end of the webinar, and let us know if you have any suggestions or topics that you'd like us to cover in the future. Today's recording and presentation slides will be posted on the CTEC website within 2 to 3 business days. We are excited to have Crystal Rose, the Family Workforce Development Coordinator, to speak to us about strengthening ties, supporting caregivers, and developing their natural supports. Thank you for joining us, and now I'll pass it on to Crystal to introduce herself and get us started.
Hi, so good morning, well, good afternoon, and welcome everyone. We are going to have a pretty interactive presentation today, and I do see a few familiar faces. So hi, hello, and I'm happy to see you again. So we are going to talk about how to strengthen the natural supports of the caregivers that you're serving, as natural supports are vital for the caregivers. So I am going to kind of get started. We're going to do some introductions. We're going to go through the agenda, and then we'll have an icebreaker just to give you an idea of what we'll be doing. So moving on to the next page, you could go to the next slide, Zaquana. Thank you. Um, Zaquana kindly introduced me. I'm Crystal Rose. Many of you have seen me before, and I I'm just sharing my experience. I am a family pet advocate. I have a beautiful young son who gives me a lot of work to do. Um, and really loves amplifying my lived experience. So, moving forward to the next slide. I will just talk a little bit about how do we define natural supports. I'm going to go through identifying different types of support. I will be going through understanding the value of supports for caregivers. And then we'll also talk about outcomes when there's a lack of support. And then we'll go through strategies to develop caregiver support systems. Okay, so there's a lot we're going to cover, and we're going to have a lot of fun. So, to kick things off, I'm going to go into our icebreaker. If we move to the next slide. So, our icebreaker today is, and I think I've used this one before, but it was so well received. I'm going to do it again. So yes, the icebreaker today will be, what is your favorite sitcom growing up? And the nostalgia is going to get real for us because it growing up, the sitcoms, usually you have the theme song like in your brain. And so one of the main ones, well, there's two, but the one that comes to me first, and I'll go first. The one that comes to me first is Family Matters, and I can just hear the song playing in the back of my head. And then the second sitcom would be, and oh, Full House. Full House was, and that song was amazing. Oh, I see Saved by the Bell. Saved by the Bell was it for me as well. Oh, I Dream of Jeannie. Yes, when I used to stay homesick from school, I used to watch that. All right. Monsters and Happy Days. Oh, Happy Days. Yes. Fresh Prince. Of course. Absolutely. I like the reboot too. I don't know if anybody's seen it. Different Strokes. Mm-hmm. Step by Step. like I can hear the music of the songs of the shows as you're sharing them. Melissa and Joey, Family Affair. I got another Full House. Absolutely, absolutely. Roseanne. Wow, that's a throwback. Thank you for that one because I forgot for a second. George Lopez. Oh, he's hilarious. Love Boat. Oh, let's not do the singing because I want to. My internal thoughts want me to sing that. Dynasty, Cheers, Did One Proud Family. Mm-hmm. Is it bad that I've seen all of these shows? Like, is it bad that I know exactly what everyone is talking about? The Cosby Show, yes, that was a good one. Laverne and Shirley, I've seen that too. Cheers. Mm-hmm. Okay. Great job, you guys, and thank you for your participation. Um, and so if you look at the chat, you'll see we all have a lot in common when it comes to that, regardless of backgrounds. Most of us watch a lot of the same shows, and so you could see who probably shared a similar experience to you by the shows that they enjoyed growing up. Okay, so we can move to the next slide. So I'm going to pose a question to everyone, and I'm open to hearing you answer. You can either use the raised hand feature, which the feature is in your reactions button on the bottom of your Zoom screen. So on the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a heart and it says react. And when you tap that, it opens up a host of things. So as a matter of fact, before we get started, let's just go into the reactions button. Just pick something. I'm going to pick the heart. And you can actually try and, you can use it in other meetings as well, but it's a great way to participate if you're not able to use your audio. But I see an alien. It's pretty cool. So what are natural supports? You can use the raised hand feature to respond to this question, or you can just unmute yourself and we can do it popcorn style, whichever works best for you. So what are natural supports?
Extended family or friends and neighbors.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Anyone else? I see in the chat family and colleagues.
People in your everyday life.
Yes, people in your everyday life. I see a hand from Coralea. Did I say that right?
It's Carolee, but that's okay.
Okay.
It's people in your community.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. People in your community, people in your lives. And did anyone want to chime in before?
Organizations and clubs that you're involved in, people that you're connected with in this associations.
Absolutely. So all of these answers that everyone has mentioned is a part of natural supports. And I'll go to the next slide. So, natural supports are the relationships and places in community that people have in their everyday lives, and they can help improve a person's quality of life. These relationships usually involve family members, friends, coworkers, neighbors, and acquaintances. And thank you to someone who also added like places of worship for whatever religious background the caregiver may have. So that is a part of their natural support community. Um, and then I'll go on the next slide, we'll talk a little more about those natural supports. So if you look at the different types of natural supports, you have family, which will include the parents, siblings, and extended family. And then you have community, like house of worship, friends and neighbors, and school. Okay. So the natural supports, it's important to know who they are. But I have a question on the next slide that I want to pose to you, which is why do we need natural supports? And I'll take answers from anyone. This is an open question to everyone here. Why do you feel we need natural supports?
Because we can't do everything by ourselves.
Absolutely.
It takes a village. Oh, somebody else just said that in the chat.
All together now, it takes a village. Yes, sharing the load, boosting yourself up. I'm seeing in the chat a few responses. I'll go through them. Says everyone needs someone they feel they can relate to or lean on for support in life to help us get through hard times. Absolutely. It takes all of us. It certainly does. Anyone else? I see in the chat to feel connected. So, absolutely, for all these reasons, natural supports are a vital part of our development. It's a vital part of, and there's another word I'm trying to use here, but how we understand the world around us. So, I'm going to move to the next slide and talk a little bit about why natural supports are important. So, natural supports build confidence. When you have others that are around you and they're saying, you know what, you can do this, or I believe in you, or if you need my help, I'm here, or tell me what you need so I can provide that level of support. You feel more confident to achieve things that maybe you're experiencing a challenge around or a level of difficulty accomplishing. The natural supports that you experience, and like we mentioned, that can come from family members or your community or your house of worship or anything of that nature, those people typically are people who know you well. And so the benefit to someone who knows you well is they can actually help to remind you of who you are, remind you of what you're capable of, and they can be a part of the conversation. They can be a part of the progress. And so, for example, a caregiver who is who has natural supports, and let's say their natural support is their mom. So let's say the caregiver is a dad, and the natural support is his mom, and he is struggling to raise two daughters. The mom knows who he has been as a young person, and she now knows who he's becoming as a man. And so she, in the process of supporting him, can give him unique and personalized support that will really help take him to that next level. So the natural supports, if there are people in the caregiver's life who are positive and reinforcing and really just there to provide help and have good intentions, then those people are some of the best people to help the caregivers pass that next step to achieve their goal. So the family, as a family pair advocate, we are here to support. We are their coaches, and we help to teach them the skills that they need so that they can move on their own. But once they're on their own, they also need to have some extra support when things start to get tricky, when the path ahead gets a little murky. I'm going to the next slide, and I'll talk about improved quality of life is another thing that natural supports can help develop. Because when you're able to share, and not just burdens, but joys, when you're able to celebrate with others, then your quality of life, it can instantly be improved. So being able to have a sense of community, a sense of belonging, and a sense of like being appreciated and understood for who you are really helps to expand your outlook and helps to brighten your outlook overall. I'll go to the next slide and we'll talk about natural supports and how they develop resiliency. So when you are going through, or should I say, when the caregiver that we serve is going through a circumstance that may be a bit much for them, whether they are feeling overwhelmed or they have just one too many tangible barriers in place, knowing that when they get tired, there is something, someone, or some individuals that they can go to feel restored, it helps them come back to fight another day. And so that resiliency is often developed in understanding that you are not alone. That resiliency is developed in understanding that I can rest and I can come back. You know, that if I put my hands down, everything doesn't come crashing down in my life. And so natural supports are really a great tool for caregivers to maximize when we are serving them, because it also helps to prevent them from putting a little too much load on the family care advocates. And when I say load, I mean emotionally. So being able to go to the natural supports that they have in their life is a way to sort of mitigate burnout that a family care advocate can experience if they're extremely involved with the caregiver who may have a difficult situation going on at the time. Okay, so I'm going to pose a new question to everyone, and you can do the same thing that you did before. You can raise your hand, you can unmute your mics, but name some barriers to developing natural supports. Carrie? You're still muted.
Anxiety.
Anxiety,
Anxiety.
absolutely. Yes. Anyone
Fear.
else? Fear. Mm-hmm.
Being an introvert,
Yeah. Anyone else?
cultural
Welcome.
stigma,
Say that one more time.
a cultural stigma,
Cultural stigma, absolutely. I'm seeing in the chat anxiety, trust, disrupted attachment, fear of burdening the supports, living out of state. So yeah, having distance from the supports. I see shame, fear of not being understood, lack of confidence, feeling as though you've burned your bridges. I think at some point everyone has felt, have I burned a bridge? Can this be mended? Lack of community involvement, pride, attachment difficulties, unfamiliarity. Excellent responses, everyone, because all of those things can become barriers to developing natural supports. Okay, next slide. So one of the barriers, and I'll just mention a few. So we're going to go through about 3 to 4 slides of me just mentioning a couple of barriers that I've identified that we can talk about. So one being isolation. Now, whether it's self-isolation or unintentional isolation due to other reasons, isolation can certainly be a barrier for natural supports. So sometimes isolation can occur if a person feels as though, and this was mentioned in the chat, if they feel as though the things that they need support with are too much for others to bear. They may self-isolate. If they feel shame or embarrassment about the circumstance or situation, they may also feel the need to isolate. Isolation can happen unintentionally. For example, there may be caregivers who lose a lot of people in their life for natural reasons, whether it's unfortunately like death can occur, people can move to another place, a series of things, a romantic relationship can end. And so now they may feel isolated. They may have health issues that can isolate them. The health issues can have them in the home alone or in a medical facility alone. So isolation is a barrier to natural supports, and a person being isolated may not know right away how to develop the skills to reach out to anyone, especially if they've been isolated for quite some time. And I just want to touch on this, but during the pandemic, many of us were unintentionally isolated because we were on lockdown. We had to stay in our homes. If we were someone who was single, who lived alone, or things like that, we may have inadvertently isolated. And so thinking about the lens of if any of you may have been by yourself or even with your family, but still just separated from your natural support system, how did it feel trying to re-enter? Do you remember what emotions went through you when you had to come back in the office to work, or emotions that went through you when you went back into open social environments? It can be hard when you've been isolated for some time to return to socializing and return to community and that expanding of yourself and your network. I'll move on to the next slide. Stigma. Stigma is a very important one, and stigma can have a huge impact on how we connect with others. Once again, shame can come up with stigma because stigma triggers the feelings of what I'm doing may be frowned upon, or I am not good enough. Stigma can also trigger, so external stigma, like those sharing an experience um, or sharing a narrative that they believe to be true, whether it is true or not, can ultimately be internalized. And then you may begin to say these things about yourself. So putting that on, putting the caregivers in that concept. Now, a caregiver may have a child, and the stigma is, oh, your child has all these behavioral issues, and you're just not a good mom. You must not discipline, or you're not paying attention. You could do better. You're not focused, or your child has a learning disability, probably because you may have a learning disability. There's so much stigma that can be applied, and then some of that stigma can be internalized. Like, how many of us have had cases that we've dealt with where people have said, I don't think I can do this because, and they've filled in the blank with something that didn't have to be true. Or cases where a caregiver may have shared language about their experience with their child that doesn't have to necessarily exist because there's another way to look at things. So stigma can be internalized, and stigma can definitely be a barrier because once someone experiences that stigma, and once someone responds to it emotionally, then they begin to separate themselves if the situation persists. So for example, like I said, if the external environment is making them feel bad about what's going on, they may stop sharing as much. If every time the caregiver goes to a family function, they're being told negative things about how they raise their child, how their child is behaving, what the child experiences, they may stop going to family functions. If the caregiver, every time they go to a restaurant, maybe the restaurant might be overstimulating, and the caregiver has a child who is on the autism spectrum, like, then they may not want to go out as much as if they typically would because they just can't deal with all the things to be expected. So stigma can really separate an individual, and it can lead to the isolation that we talked about previously. I'll move on to the next slide, which is overwhelm. Overwhelm is a psychological barrier that a caregiver can experience because the overwhelm is all in your head. That overwhelm can cause someone to shut down. It can cause them to believe that trying to voice how they feel or include others in their story is just way too much. Overwhelm can cause like executive functioning disorder, like you can't keep yourself organized, you don't remember dates for things. So if your one self-care regimen is to meet up with your girlfriends for brunch every Sunday, but you are overwhelmed, you may forget the day. You may not have anything to wear and you don't feel like dealing with that. You may not want to deal with the hair. So it's like, I don't want to comb my hair. I don't like how I look. I'm overwhelmed. It's just too much. I'm not making it, guys. Catch me next time. And next time can possibly never happen if we don't address the overwhelm. So overwhelm can really take over our decision-making process. It can take over our social experience. It can take over our progress at work, being able to work and be productive, a productive person in the workplace. And so overwhelm does need to be managed. Overwhelm does need to be addressed, and it has to be taken seriously as a true barrier. Um, not in, to natural supports, to identifying the natural supports, yes, but to a barrier to a number of things. Um, Someone who's overwhelmed may not even be able to recall who is someone that supports them. Sometimes if you've ever asked anyone, who do you have in your corner, and they don't even remember. They don't even remember who's got their back, who's in their corner. They're just like, I don't even know right now, because their brain cannot put the pieces together. Okay, so I'll move on to the next slide, and I want to ask a new question. So I'm looking for some answers, is how do you assess the support networks in a caregiver's life? So how do you assess who the caregiver's natural supports are? Okay, I see some things in the chat. Let me take a look. I see Lindsay said, you ask, is it positive and helpful, or does it take more from them? Okay. Tiara says daily interactions. Kara says ask. Jenny says fans and conversation. Alicia, how that support affects the person. And Yolanda says who shows up for that person. Okay, very good. I'm seeing conversations, level of comfort that the caregiver has, who will help hide the body. Always gets a good laugh. Yes, I'm sure, because I'm laughing now, so I can just imagine. All of these things are awesome. You guys are awesome, because it's like you're like in my slides, like I can't even. But yes, there are a number of ways to assess the support networks in a caregiver's life. And I saw a few of them mentioned. I'll go to the next slide and we'll talk about it. So one of the ways is FANS. So the FANS assessment is a formal assessment, and this formal assessment can give you lots of insight as to what the caregiver's needs are and who is the support in the caregiver's life. Then you can use assessments like observation. So in the process of conversing with your caregiver, and you're taking, let's say, for example, you're doing your notes, your progress notes, and things are happening, observe. Pay attention to what they're saying, pay attention to who they bring up the most, what names they probably mention most frequently. And if they mention someone that seems to be playing a shadow role in the background, but you're unclear as to who that individual is, please ask further questions. Tell me more about your mom and how do you feel she is? And I'm posing a question, but like if they're like, yeah, I do this and this is what my day looks like, and this is what happened yesterday, and my daughter did this, and my mom helped out in this way, and they're not being clear, you can ask. Once you hear them identifying people in their life, begin to dig a little deeper with some open-ended questions. Tell me more about this person. Who are they? Where did you meet them? How much do you share about them? How helpful are they for you? Dig deeper after observing. And then you can also offer self-assessments. So you can basically gather some data. You can get self-assessments from online. There's resources or tools that are available to family care advocates as well as social workers that allow caregivers to do sort of like a self-check. And the self-assessment can actually be informal. It can just be a series of questions that you can ask that will allow them to think and say, you know what, these are who my natural supports are. And so observation, self-assessment, and FADS, those are three ways that you can assess a caregiver's natural supports. So some of the reflective questions that you can give the caregiver, or should I say that they can ask themselves for like a self-assessment, is who is the first person that comes to mind when I need help? And without hesitation too, like right off the tongue, when you need help, who is the first person you think of? And allow them the time, to ask themselves that and to really think about it. And sometimes the answer could change. They may think it's one person and they realize it's actually somebody else. Because that happens too. Another question that they can ask themselves is, when I feel safe and comfortable, who is usually around me? And that is a question that allows them to kind of think about the holistic sense of who their natural support is. Like when you're most relaxed, who's there? Because when you're comfortable, oftentimes if something comes naturally and it's comfortable, you can overlook it. And so you forget that the person who is just stealthily in the background, always got your back, is a support system for you. Um, Another question that can be posed, and these are just suggestions. I'm sure you guys can come up with great questions as well for your caregivers, and you can actually create a list if you'd like to keep handy that you can use with them. But who is in closest proximity to me that I can trust? And so these are some questions that they can begin to ask themselves, and they can write down, say, in this session that you're having, brainstorming maybe a list of people that they can identify as their natural support system, somebody that they can see as trustworthy, someone that they can see as consistent, someone that they can see as supportive, and help them identify those things. So, in the process of doing all of that thinking and trying to identify who the natural supports are, sometimes it can happen that broken connections are identified as well. So, they may say, well, actually, I used to rely a lot on my older sister, but we haven't spoken in years. Or actually, I used to talk to my uncle, but since I moved, it's been a while. So, when they start discussing and talking about who their natural supports could be, you do want to hold a conversation and ask some questions like, what has changed from then and now? Right? Because if you can see the what, then you can start to talk a little bit about how. So if the what is very tangible, like for example, a move miles away, it may be difficult to rebuild that connection easy. It's not impossible, but it won't be easy. So it might be important to say, okay, who else do you have on your list that's in closer proximity to you? But if it's something as simple as, I haven't been out of the house in a while because I had the flu, and I feel like my friend thinks that we're not friends anymore because I wasn't able to answer her calls. Things got a little crazier. I got a little overwhelmed. Then you can start to develop a how. So, how then do we rebuild that connection with the friend that you saw as a support once before? And it's kind of fragmented at this point now, right? Then another question that you can ask is, well, they can ask themselves, have I pulled away and why? And so, kind of like what we discussed earlier when we kind of went over isolation can be intentional or unintentional. Like in the same way, did I pull away or did they pull away? Because it can be either. It can be either or. Sometimes when an individual is going through something or they're working hard to kind of move past um, a mountain in their life, they can become less interactive with the people around them. And so that self-awareness to say, you know what, I stopped making daily calls, or I haven't been to church in a while, or mosque or synagogue, like to identify that, oh, it's been some time since I've actually done the things that I usually do. I pulled away. I actually have, the supports never left. I left. And so that's another way to identify how to then develop a solution for that broken connection. One of the final questions is, who has tried to reach out to me and have I received their support? So in ways it's similar to the previous one, but it can be very different because the connection is still there, but the thing is, are you receptive? So when people are offering the support to you, are you able to accept it? And I chuckle a little bit because I just want to see, you can either put it in the chat or by a raise of hands. How many of us have a hard time sometimes accepting help? Yeah. Yeah. And so we're the family prayer advocates. So imagine now the caregivers, if it's like, okay, they're like, okay, I have all these things going on. And it's like, all right, who do you have to help? And they might say, I don't have anybody. Or do they? Or did someone try to support them and they weren't able to receive it right away? So, and it's something that it needs to be observed and it can be addressed. And so if you recognize that the caregiver that you're dealing with, that you're helping, is struggling to receive support, I would then note that's something that they need to develop. It may require possibly counseling, it may require some coaching, it may require something, but if they're struggling to receive support, but the support is there, we have to understand how to develop that in them, how to allow them to be more receptive. Yeah, I'm sorry. I see in the chat some people saying I'm quick to help, but I don't know how to accept help. Yeah, unintentionally, I feel I learn best without putting my hands on it first. Yeah, so many of us. But it's okay to just say, you know what? Yeah, I still see a hand up. Is that a question, Candace, or is it from before? Okay, no problem. Just double checking. All right. So, yeah, are they receptive? And so, while you're holding these conversations and while the caregiver is doing the internal work, asking these questions and kind of searching inside themselves, I would encourage you to pay attention to what they're doing. So, use your observational skills and pay close attention to the body language, the tone, and the language of the caregiver that you're working with. Be mindful that reflective questions can evoke emotion. So as they're discussing and that these questions are being posed and they're going through the thought process, there may be some things that can happen there. And I just want to say, we have to be careful in that area because as they're thinking about support, they may go back to some trauma. There might be something in the past that they may connect to. And so I want to be careful because you want to just be mindful of what their emotional state is to know if this particular exercise probably needs to stop for a second and we need to take a break. Do we need to breathe? Do we need to, walk? Like what can be done so that we can make sure that the caregiver does not become too overwhelmed in this process? Okay, I'll move on to the next slide. So, a new question for you guys. How do you strengthen natural supports? So of course, I have some info on the next slide, but I want to get some feedback from the advocates here. How would you strengthen natural supports? Okay, I see some responses in the chat, and feel free to also unmute or do the raised hand. It's nice to hear your voices sometimes, but I see communication. I see encourage them to reach out. I see support the caregiver in accessing support, remind them of their natural supports, spend more time with the people in your life that support you, help take away barriers to the person asking for help, encourage them to go to groups, keeping in contact regularly. weekly check-ins, check-ins. Attend a support group with them. Excellent responses. So absolutely. To strengthen natural supports, all of those things can be used, and I'll talk more about that on the next slide. So, you can strengthen their ability to express needs and boundaries. So, I like questions because questions make us think. So some of the questions can be, like what I am or am not comfortable with. What are you comfortable with? Like, how do you feel when this happens? How do you feel when that happens? Another one is, what am I currently working on? And so this allows them to see, am I working on anything? Is there some place that I need to spend more time and when I say someplace, I mean in and of myself that I need to spend more time developing. And how well am I feeling? How do you feel? What are some of the emotions that are going through your mind right now as we're holding this conversation? And when you think of person X or when you think of situation X, what emotions come up for you? How do you feel in your body? You can also help strengthen their ability to be vulnerable. So that includes asking for help. And that can be done with just some role play. Like you can hold these conversations with them, like, okay, let's say I'm your mom and you need to get more support, or let's say I am the teacher or whatever the person that they're having difficulty connecting with is, then you and the caregiver can go kind of back and forth. And with that, you can coach them through ways to ask for help and allow them to develop the courage or develop the frame of mind to really pose the question and feel comfortable asking for it. And also, you can work on how well they receive help. And this can be also some gentle coaching where if just guiding them verbally, if you are receiving, if someone is offering their help to you, being receptive, saying thank you, or being able to just say, yes, I do need that, and not, oh, I think I can take care of it on my own, though. Like, try not to wrap the sentence up with what you can do, but more so try to wrap your sentence up with, um, I appreciate you helping me with this, or thank you for taking care of that, receiving the help. I'll move on to the next slide. We can also help them develop their natural supports by strengthening social skills. So that can include identifying local resources and events to participate in with family. So, for example, there may be family days at the Children's Museum that they can attend where they can see other caregivers, they can see other people. So, this can be beneficial if they don't have any identified natural supports. Now they can make some. So let's make some friends. Let's make some friends in the same position that we are in. And this can also include going back out there to the social places that you may have gone before. Telling the caregiver, okay, what were some of the places that you enjoyed, taking your family to? What were some of the places that you and your child thrive the most at? How can we return to those places? Would you like me to come with you? Do you need any support? Do you have transportation to get to those places? So these are some of the things that we want to do. We want to talk to them about what it is that they think they can or have enjoyed, and then see if we can return them to that. So you want to start with things that they're already familiar with, and then if those things are unavailable, then we try new things, and we can try new things with that extra added support of your family peer advocate. This can also include participating in support groups, organizations or clubs with like interests. And when I say organizations, oftentimes giving back can help. Like if the caregiver maybe, they have some time, they have the capacity to do volunteer opportunities, would they want to take on something and help, bring together the toy drive, or would they want to volunteer and help support something else going on so they can participate in an organization? They can even start to get more information about how to become a family peer advocate. If they're starting to consistently and sustainably achieve their goals, the conversation can be developed. Where do you want to go from here? As a family pet advocate, you can work with others, and also clubs with like interest. And when I say clubs, that can also include like affinity groups, anything like mom's club, babysitting club, things where people can gather together. So that, like, I believe some, and I'm not a man, so I don't remember what this is called, but there's a bunch of family pet advocate dads that gather together, and they have like their organization. And so there's dad groups where all the dads meet, because being a single dad is like a niche thing. And so, or sometimes just being a dad with a certain experience, it can be niche. And so they all get together and they meet and they create a network. They create a unit where they can come and support one another, because they feel like these are the people who can identify with their experiences and situations. And so that's what they're doing. Any gentlemen in the dads groups, family pet advocate dad groups, drop them in the chat so that if there's other dads out there who don't know about them, they can also participate. But things like that are ways that caregivers can strengthen their social skills, and we can help walk them through that conversation. We can walk them through that strategy. So we can have them make a list. We can have them sort of map it out. We can have them develop a chart. We can just have them help them update their calendar, and we can give them reminders. Hey, don't forget, your volleyball, mom and me volleyball club is coming up. Your dad and me bike group is coming up. I really would like to hear how that went for you and your child. So it's important for us to help strengthen their social skills. So how we assist with this process, our FPA facilitation, is we identify the families with social needs. And so if you're noticing, and this kind of ties into something we talked about a few months ago, which was support groups. If you're noticing in your information, like as you're doing progress notes and different things, that there's a trend, you can help support the caregivers by building these networks. You can put together a support group and help them foster connections with one another. If you notice a trend with anything at all, the trend could be many of these people are, let me think, they all like to cook. They all like to cook. And I think that this is something that they all have in common. All of these caregivers might have great conversations. Would you like to generate some type of group where the caregivers can meet and discuss that? Or if it's around a need, if all of the caregivers have had unfortunately lost somebody, and you might need to develop a support group, excuse me, around grief and resiliency, like how to deal with that. So just if you can identify trends, then you can support the caregivers with their natural supports by helping to build connection. And they can engage in a proper suited environment depending on the need. So if the caregivers are very busy, it may be good to try a Zoom. Everybody could be in different locations. If the area that you serve can be kind of grand, or transportation is an issue, then it can be digital. It can be in a Zoom room. If those factors are not at play, it can be in person. So if it's a smaller community, and your organization maybe has a community room or there's space, you can do something in person. And if there isn't a designated space that you can meet, there you can find a quiet nook in maybe a cafe or a room in the library. The libraries often allow people to do things in their rooms, and it doesn't always have like any cost involved, but I would speak to the library representatives. But please make use of your local libraries. They are a great resource and a great place to hold groups and meetings of different types that are for the community. Okay. So another question for you all is, how do we maintain connections once they are developed? You can feel free to unmute and let me know. How do we maintain connections once they are developed?
Regular contact.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? I see consistency from Tamara. Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Okay, utilizing the help. I'm seeing the chat is filling up here. Go for it, guys. Check-ins. Okay. Keep interacting and keep it going. Absolutely. Reminders about give and take, conversation, having them make a plan on how they're going to remain engaged. I love that. Making sacrifices, going out of your way, being selfless. Relationships are constant. Asking when is the next event that they will be attending, taking an interest in them, being transparent. Perfect. And yes. So there are so many ways that can be used to maintain connections. And just a slight sidebar, what I share is the suggestions that I have. But if there's anything you want to add to that, feel free to add, because creativity is available to everyone. You know, some of you may have ideas that I have not listed, and I'm sure that they are incredible. And so you can drop them in the chat if you see it, if you have one and you want people to know about it. But I'm going to go through the slides. So maintenance for natural supports can include regular check-ins and follow-ups. So many of you have mentioned this, so yes. So how have you been since the ... You know, so let's say they started going to a social gathering, or let's say they started going back to family events because they're ready to, you know, re-involve themselves and get connected again. How have you been since that? Or how did the meeting go? Or how did the meeting for such and such go? So if they went to a support group, or if they started taking a class, maybe the caregiver went back to school, how did that go? You know, what did you learn? Did it feel good for you? Who did you talk to? Inclusion and interest can be, would you like to join me for? And so, and inclusion and interest, let me take a step back for that. Inclusion and interest would be valuable for a caregiver that is struggling to kind of achieve the step of re-entering their social space or re-entering the community that they were once connected to. If you're noticing that there's a struggle there and you're meeting the caregiver, and every time you speak to them, they have not done the thing that they said they're going to do, you have to go deeper into the situation. For those of you that are familiar with the PAC model from the PEP Advanced training, you can use elements, you can use the PAC model to really help identify what is the root cause of that barrier. And also, you can really offer extra support. You may need to change how they're going to go about reaching the same objective that they're trying to reach. The objective is to develop a natural support system, right? Oh, that's their goal. And so what are some of the things that they're going to do to get there? And so if you notice that they're not getting there, then you may need to add a little extra support. Like, would you like me to join you? And if it's something that you can join them for. If it's not something that you can join them for, you can ask them, what are some ways that you'd like for me to support you? So those are some of the things you can do. Also asking, what did you like most about it? Right? And so that is an open-ended leading question. And that open-ended leading question is great because it allows the caregiver to have, and there's a word I'm looking for, that it allows them to have more positive reinforcement and more positive language, changing the way that they're addressing the situation. So instead of how did you feel about it, which is just open-ended and it's fine, what did you like most allows the person to, it's strength-based. That's the word I was looking for. What did you like most about X, Y, or Z is a strength-based question. It allows them to focus on what goes well. This way, that is what they're retaining as a prior, like the main thought, the priority thought, and what they're retaining is what went well. It's something that is strength-based. And so these are some of the ways that you can kind of help them understand the maintenance process for the natural supports that they're trying to develop and the connections that they're trying to reinforce. Okay. So I am just about at the end of my presentation. And so my question to you is, well, before I even ask you what your biggest takeaway was, I'm just going to go and recap very quickly everything that we've talked about. So we've defined natural supports. We've gone through ways to assess and identify what the natural support systems are. We've talked about how the caregiver can be self-aware in that process and really identify if they're receptive, if they're receiving, what are some of the causes of the challenges to them receiving their natural supports, and then giving them solutions to overcome those challenges, to overcome those barriers, and then following up with the maintaining it. So, out of everything that we've discussed, what would you say was your biggest takeaway from what we've talked about? Scary.
Finding more ways to get families engaged in their natural supports. I get ghosted a lot after people meet their primary goal, whether it's like a functioning IEP for their child or whatever the case may be. I get ghosted hard. So trying to find ways to get them more involved in their communities and natural support, so it's not like they go through a crisis, dump me, go through a crisis, get another referral. You know, trying to stop that pattern of referral dump. My heart can't take it. A girl needs flowers.
I know what you mean, Carrie. That ghosting element is really hard. It's hard to deal with. And I wish it didn't exist, but unfortunately, we end up dealing with stuff like that. But yes, absolutely. I love that. Anyone else? I'm going to jump to the chat, but before we do, did anyone want to unmute and share what their biggest takeaway was?
Well, I thought this was all very interesting because when I do come across a family that does not have any or very few natural supports, the idea to develop them is very interesting. So just kind of looking at it from a different way, like we can develop your natural supports, and it could be as easy as just going to a museum on family day, or it could be going to the library for story time, and just trying to just be creative with how to help them engage in their community. So I appreciated that.
Absolutely. And thank you, Michelle. Yeah. Sometimes it's just a reworking of what we already have that we're working with and seeing what are some of the other ways we can turn it around and look at it. So thank you for that. All right, let me see. I see some responses in the chat. I see the value of helping people identify their natural supports, and how to feel most comfortable asking for help and support. That was from Tara. Thank you. And then Jenny says, you can get so caught up in supporting goals that this topic can get overlooked. Yeah, I think so. And, both are very valuable, right? um, I have from Alana, focusing on vulnerability can help strengthen natural supports by being willing to accept help. Vulnerability is so important to a lot. So I think that's spot on. Vicky says, important to understanding the barriers and emotional challenges to accepting support. Yep. Amelia says, assisting people so that they can identify who their supports are. And so I see some people identifying with Carrie. Carrie, you gotta, you have some people like, yeah, I know what you mean. And then Corrine says, overcoming barriers. Kim says, support. Yes. Wendy says, getting families to be more reflective on who they have as supports and how they can be useful. Absolutely. Alicia says the importance of natural supports and helping people identify them. And if they don't have them, helping them find them, of course. And then Tiara says, helping people understand isolation can be intentional or unintentional due to life situations. And it's okay, but being able to move beyond that. Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm so glad that you guys, had that takeaway and you were able to pull something from this. So I appreciate your time. I'm going to give my thank yous and move on to the final slide. Once again, I am Crystal Rose. I'm the Family Workforce Development Coordinator at Families Together. And I really hope that you enjoyed today's webinar. Thank you again. So it's time for Q&A.
Thank you, Crystal. We have some great questions that were submitted into the chat during the presentation. And the first one is, can we see the fans?
You see the fans?
Yes, the FANS, what you discussed to figure out support systems, how to identify support systems. You mentioned fans.
So I don't have fans visible. So I don't have that to present to you, and I'm so sorry. I wish I did. But what I can say is if you have not taken your fans training, then you can email FPA credential at ftnys.org. And then we can see if we can get you into the next one. I hope that response helps. Yeah, and I see the email
So
has
I
been
can
dropped in the
give,
chat.
so I can give a little bit more information on the fans.
Sure.
So hey everybody, my name is Carrie Ann Royer. I'm the Director of Training and Workforce Development at Families Together, for those who don't know me. So the fans training is the FANS is an assessment that is specific to family peer support. In order to use the FANS, you do have to be trained in the FANS. So there is trainings that happen on a regular basis. I'm going to put in the chat a link to our website page that talks all about the FANS, what it is, how to sign up for the basic training. Once you become trained, then you will receive the FANS assessment itself, and during that training, you're going to be taught how to use it, how to administer it, how to use it once it's administered, and all of those good things. Once you're once you are credentialed in order to use the FANS, then you do have to renew that every year. And that is just by taking an online test, and that's explained during the basic training. So if you have already taken it and you're I don't think they call it a credential. I think they call it a certification. If your certification is outdated, please make sure that you go to our website and see how you can bring that up to good standing. If you haven't taken it check the website, see how you can register. The next training dates are January 14th and 15th. And there's links in there to register and for criteria. The criteria is that you have to be a credentialed family peer advocate, and that can be either provisionally credentialed or professionally credentialed.
Thank you, Carrie Ann, for that resource and further information.
Thank
Um,
you.
I think we have one more question. So the next question is, how does financial costs factor into these activities/events? So this came up when you were speaking about ways to engage with different with the community or different natural supports. Um, and they asked about financial costs.
Okay, so financial costs can be a barrier for the caregiver. And so I would say dealing with that can happen in a number of ways. So number one, we want to kind of try to find things that the caregiver can participate in that do not come at a cost to them. So oftentimes, like museums, will have like free days. And the libraries, also the events typically don't come at a major cost. Now, if it's something that, like if it's transportation and things like that, now, I would probably I would see what your agency does, because I know some family care advocates, they help provide transportation for their caregivers. Some agencies, depending on where you are, they might be able to provide Metro cards. If you're in like a city area and you're riding the bus, like New York City or something. So when you're saying financial, and I hope I'm answering the question properly, I would say those are some of the ways that you can mitigate a financial challenge. Is just one, trying to find things that come at no cost, and two, if the cost is transportation, then using one of the elements that one of the options that I've suggested. And then you can also converse with your supervisor to see if there's any other options or available as well.
Thank you. So for all participants who are in here, please be sure to know that there's an upcoming CTAC event, Building Confidence in Youth as a Youth Peer Advocate, which is a toolkit that will be provided on Friday, December 20th. Thank you, Crystal, for a great presentation, and thank you everyone for your time and attention. As a reminder, today's recording and slides will be available on the CTAC website within the next 2 to 3 business days. Our coordinator will be sending out a link in the chat box so you can complete our brief feedback survey, which you will also receive in an email in case you're unable to complete it at this time. On behalf of Families Together New York State and CTAC and Crystal, thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.